Welcome to the Innovators and Investors Podcast. I'm Kristian Marquez, founder and CEO of Finstrat Management. At Finstrat, we provide CFO-led accounting, finance, and reporting services to assist clients monetize their business. Stick around to the end of the podcast, and I'll share how you can be our next guest. Now, on to the show. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Innovators and Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Kristian Marquez, founder and CEO of Finstrat Management. With us today, we've got Scott Wharton. Scott is the CEO of Tandem PV. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here, Kristian.
Hey, so let's start with Tandem. Love to know what problem it's solving in the market.
Yeah, so we're making a next generation solar panel, and the problem that we're solving is kind of twofold. One is people have been reading about AI and that we have insatiable power demand, and we're creating what I think is the most cost-effective and most available power solution for AI out there. The second thing is today, 95% of most solar energy technology comes from China. And I think anybody reading the paper or living in the world or not under a rock knows that we just can't get all of our energy, a future energy source from China. So there's a big drive to have American-made manufacturing in solar, and we're kind of leading in those twin areas, solving those problems.
So I'm going to say it's a fair bet most of our audience aren't electrical engineers nor took the class in college. And so for those of us who have, one of the things that we know is that power loss is a real thing. And so you comment about cost effective. Is it fair to say that one of the big benefits of solar is not only is there ample sunlight, but if you're using energy at the source, it's a tremendous advantage?
It could be, although what I would say is we're basically selling to the utility scale part of the market. So usually when I get asked this question, they go, solar, that means my house. Actually, I think that's a myth. Less than 10% of all solar energy in the US is on the rooftop for a house. So 82% of the energy last year was for these farms that you drive by and fields and highways and stuff. That's what we're selling to. That's primarily what's driving the AI revolution. And the main thing that we're doing is providing a panel that's about the same size. So it's about 1 by 2 meters, so size of a door. And we're basically 30% more power. So it's just basically building a better mousetrap. And when you have more density, you can save a lot on the things that actually cost a lot more. So only 20% of a solar farm's cost is the panel today. It's more like the land, the labor to install it, the electronics around it. So by having it be 30% more dense, you could save a ton more money just by having it. So most of the reason why people want our solution is it's actually the lowest cost solution out there for energy. So not only is it more available for solar, but it's just cheaper, and that's a pretty good combination. And made in the US is a kicker.
Well, I didn't really ever think about the fact of the footprint of where the panels are located, but it makes great sense. And so if you can share some of the innovation that Tandem's employing in order to achieve that, even if on a layman's basis, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to, since most people are not electrical engineers, I'll spare them that. So we're using this new material science. It's called the perovskite. And perovskites are something that were discovered a couple hundred years ago, but really only being used for solar in the last, call it, dozen years. And it's this miracle semiconductor material that's 200 times thinner than traditional silicon panels. So it's literally 1/100th the width of a human hair, super thin. It doesn't use any rare earth metals or minerals. There's no mining involved. So literally we take some chemicals in a lab in California. We make essentially what's an ink that's 1 millimeter thick, super, super thin. And then we put it on an existing piece of glass that would go out for solar anyway to protect it. So the cost of it and the physics of it are dramatically cheaper. It even uses about 10% of the energy that you do for kind of building a silicon panel. So it's a better, faster, cheaper solar technology. There are about hundreds of companies in the world working on this because it's the holy grail of energy and solar. I'd say there are probably about 8 companies in the world that have significant. We're one of them, and right now I'd say we're leading. And the reason why we're leading is in order to be successful, you need really high performance. Because if it's worse than the old stuff, who cares? Then you need to make the stuff last for decades because the current solar technology is actually amazing. Most of it can go to 90% performance within 30 years. So it's just astounding how durable it is. And you need to be able to make the stuff and manufacture it. So we've kind of solved the 3 things. And right now we're transitioning from late stage R&D into manufacturing to build our first commercial factory, and then we'll be selling this stuff sometime next year.
Wow. So, what were some of the historical limitations that prevented a universal adoption of the technology?
You mean solar or this perovskite stuff?
The perovskites.
Well, the main thing is it, like silicon in the early days of solar panels, it was actually quite brittle. It would fall apart. But solar for silicon's been around for
Sure.
almost 70 years right now. So they've made the transition from it falls apart right away to like bulletproof. Like this stuff just works all the time. So we've gone through a similar transition, but instead of doing it over 70 years, it's happened over a decade. Where you get it, we're now almost as good, getting to almost as good as silicon, but that's the holy grail of making it last for a long time. And it's a very, very difficult technical problem to solve. We're definitely a deep tech company. And it is a combination of a bunch of things. It's material science, it's physics, it's
Got it.
chemistry, it's metallurgy. It's part of what I like about this company is it's very interdisciplinary. You can't just have one smart scientist and figure it out. You really need a team with different backgrounds.
And so, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, this is the future, and that it will be very difficult for silicon-based solar companies to compete. So, what are some of the implications? Are we seeing them pivot? Um,
Well, there's a couple of things. So with silicon technology, there's like a limit based on physics, and they're nearly hitting that limit where they just can't get any better.
hmm,
The reason why the company is called Tandem is we actually make a two-layer solar panel. I call it a solar panel sandwich, where you have the perovskite layer on top, you have the silicon layer on bottom. So one of the things we do is we're not making the silicon, but we're leveraging this 70 years of R&D that's gone into the silicon. So by having the two layers, they both capture different parts of the light spectrum, which allows us to get to this 28% efficiency. So what that means effectively is for every 100 beams of light hitting the panel, we can take 28 of them and convert them into electricity. A traditional silicon solar panel today is about 21.
oh,
And the theoretical limit for silicon is probably about 26%. Perovskites in this tandem configuration can get to 45. So we've got room to run.
wow. And so hence why you require a smaller footprint to achieve a bigger output.
That's right. And we're just getting started like 28. We think we're going to get to the mid 30s sometime in the next medium term, let's say 3 years plus or minus. That's obviously way better than what you have from traditional silicon. And, it's not the same with computing where everything's like 10 or 100x, but in the energy scale, 30, 40% is enormously improved.
And so, are there opinions of what the ceiling is for the technology in terms of capture?
Yeah, I mean, people have said 45 to 50% is kind of the theoretical limit, depending on whether you have two layers or three. So 45 is kind of what we're doing today. So there's plenty of room to improve.
Interesting. And so, so the other big theme that we talked about is onshoring or nearshoring, just given the world writ large. Is it fair to say that of the 7 to 8 companies that you referenced, most of those are taking place in outside of China, or is China also actively focused on this technology?
Yeah. Well, I would say if you look at the old technology silicon, like I said, China dominates that space. So 95% of the silicon technology for the cells comes from China. 98 is the wafer technology, which is part of it. So they're almost doing the whole thing. And with perovskites, it's a little more like 50-50. So 4 companies in the US, 1 in Europe, 3 in China. So China is certainly trying. But one of the benefits of what we're doing is this is kind of like a white sheet of paper. So you can't just take, like a lot of startups, you can't take the old technology and just go to the new. It's like you can't, if you're building cars, you can't just build rockets, except for Elon, he can do that. But for everyone else, like that's a different skill set. So you almost have to start over. So a lot of their incumbent advantages, they don't necessarily apply into this new world. So I think it is an opportunity for the US to both leapfrog and also kind of take control of our destiny. So just a couple of stats for the audience. So last year, more than 90% of new energy in the US came from solar, wind, and batteries. So we're already heavily transitioned to solar. In the first 2 months of this year, 98% of our new energy came from solar and wind.
Wow.
So already it's been moving so fast, and part of this is driven because solar's got the best economics and the best availability. We're already mostly transitioning to solar, in terms of all the things that we do that are new. But a lot of that technology comes from China. And if you look at the recent history that, in Europe, they said, well, we could buy this gas from a guy named Vladimir. He's a good guy. He's self-interested. He won't cut us off, right? What could go wrong? And we all, I think, have seen that movie play out. So I think there's a recognition now in the US on a bipartisan level that we can't get all of our future energy from China. It's just not tenable.
So I totally agree. I think your assessment is spot on. And I would say just macro, I think we'll continue to see reshoring taking place for a bunch of reasons. Maybe security is at the top of the list. But I would be curious. I mean, I think it's probably a safe bet to say that 95% of the solar panel production ended up in China because of cost. But were there any other structural limitations why manufacturing wasn't already taking place in the US?
Yeah, it's partly because the Chinese have a different system than we do. So we have a system of venture capital where you have to go out and raise money. The Chinese don't have that system. They have mostly state-sponsored funding, and they just give you unlimited money. So that's number one.
Got it.
It's just a lot easier to get money. The second thing is traditional silicon panels use a ton of electricity, and they tend to have cheaper electricity than we do. The third thing is that the Chinese cheat. They don't play by the same rules that we do. So I think a lot of people say, "Oh, I want free trade, and everything should be free." Well, the Chinese basically in certain sectors like solar and cars and batteries, they give away free land, free labor, free capital. Sometimes it's slave labor in some cases. So that's not free trade. And then even with all that, then they sell below cost. So yeah, I mean, anybody who wants to give away everything for free and sell below cost, like that's not an equal playing field. So I think in those sectors, the Chinese have done well because they take these advantages and then they dump on the global markets. Now, the reality is they've been doing this for decades. And I think not only in the United States, but a whole bunch of other places around the world are like, enough, like it's not fair. And I would say, most of us, including me, like I believe in free trade when it's free and fair, but this is a case where it's not. So if you just want to leave it to the free market and then one player doesn't play by the rules, then yeah, they're going to dominate all these sectors that we think we care about: cars, energy, semiconductors. Now, I would argue, do we really need to make our shoes here and other things? Probably not. I would say it's not strategic, but there are certain areas like energy and chips, pharmaceuticals, maybe food. Like you want to have some of it here so you're not just completely beholden to an adversary.
Well, I agree with your assessment, and I'm optimistic that the shift that we're seeing is structural, not temporary, and under that's taking place. There's a realization that we absolutely have a list of assets that are core to our security, and that we need to make sure that we have control over them. It's interesting, on the subject of financing, have you seen a cultural shift also among investors to say, you know what, this may be, a longer time horizon for us to realize an ROI, but we're in on hard assets, and we want to get behind you.
Not really. I'd say that there's this concept in the climate space called, some people politely call it the missing middle. I'd say the unpolite version is the valley of death. So what that means is that there's a bunch of early stage money for startups, funding from the government to do R&D, basic stuff, small stuff. And then if you become $1 billion entity, there's plenty of money for you to get loans or other things. But how do you go from R&D to actually scaling when you still have that risk? So what happens in the climate space, deep tech overall, but climate in particular, is we're making physical things. It's not largely a software problem. And a lot of VCs will say, Scott, we're rooting you from the sidelines, and I would love for you to succeed. But I want to be the 10th player to come in. And then you have this tragedy of the commons where in the American system, a lot of people want to come in last and de-risk it. So there is this missing middle. We've been really fortunate in that we basically broke through that by just raising a $50 million round. So that's allowing us to build our first factory. And there was a case study written about us about how we had to do venture debt, venture financing, catalytic capital, charitable capital, government funds. Like you have to pull together the whole thing to make it work. But is it easy? No, it's really hard. Like our system's just not geared for that. And I think that's part of the reason why the Chinese are winning is that their government is giving money into this particular area where companies need it most, and our government is not doing it. And then part of the reason for that is, I mean, most of the people listening know of Solyndra 15 years ago, where we had one failure and you had a ton of other successes. But because of one failure, I mean, the government is gun shy. Like, what if we make a mistake? Well, yeah, I mean, that's what happens in early stage investment. Anybody who knows it as VC investing, it's most of the stuff you do is a failure, but that's can be okay if you have a bunch of big successes.
You know, so it's fascinating. So, to be fair, I wish you all the success in the world, and that, Tandem is just, over the top, knocks it out of the park. That said, are there any names for this current round of 50 million that you want to give a shout out to, for, having the courage to get behind
Yeah, I
the.
mean, the main one I give is there's a VC called Eclipse Capital. They're based in Palo Alto, and they have a $5 billion fund. And what's interesting about them is they're not purely a climate VC; they're a manufacturing VC. And I love their vision. Their founder is a guy named Lior Sharon, and his vision was, hey, the global economy is about $100 trillion a year, and 20% of it is really competitive software, et cetera. That's where all the VCs play. So what happens is they find the niche, and then 50 companies get invested, and then they get flooded with money. It's hard to make money that way. And then there's this $80 trillion of the world, these huge companies, energy and healthcare and government, like really slow moving businesses that are enormous. No VC money is in there because it's not software. It's mostly hardware and big, slower moving industries. And they're like, we're going to play there because none of the other VCs are playing there. I love that vision of going where everyone else isn't, and they're true visionaries. I'd also call it Trellis Capital. They're a nonprofit venture funder that had the vision to fund this when a lot of their peers are going, you know what, solar's a solved problem. And then they said, actually it isn't. We need to go to the next stage.
So shout out to them both. And so, notwithstanding the courage of and conviction of investors like those two, if you had your druthers, what do you think needs to change in order to get more investors on board with getting behind capital intensive projects like Tandem?
One idea I have, which is not conventional, is if people come from Wall Street and you're a financier and you think about risk, a lot of taking risk is about diversifying it and having a shared risk pool. And I think that almost everyone in the country wants these projects to succeed. They just don't want to do it themselves. So my idea is if you had a lot of people put in a very small amount, and then we could all participate together, you could diversify the risk. So I'd love to see some buying pools, and maybe it's a combination of the government and the private sector, maybe nonprofits, where they put in a combination of capital with different motivations that help kind of solve this funding problem. Because I can tell you that every conference I go to says, first of its kind funding, the valley of death. Boy, that's a real problem. I wish someone would solve it, but no one is. So maybe there's a way to do it through classic finance and diversification. And it's that people want to make returns and people want to have a social. You maybe have a blend of capital and a blend of risk. I'd love to see something like that.
All right, so audience members take heed. We need a crowd solution to get behind capital intensive projects that are going to benefit the country.
Yeah, you kill it if you put that together.
There you go. If we could take a step back for a moment, would love to hear what your career progression looked like leading up to Tandem.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not an electrical engineer or scientist by training. I have an MBA, and when I applied to business school, I wanted to do something that other people didn't do. So I wanted to work on renewable energy. That was what my essay was. And when I did my internship, I worked at the Solar Energy Industry Association a million years ago for $4 an hour. And I kind of fell in love with solar, but the problem was it was just too early in the industry life cycle. So I got back to campus and I'm kind of moping around saying, what else do I want to do? And I'm like, well, there's this internet thing. That might be a good idea. That ended up being a pretty good idea. So I ended up going to an internet startup, which ended up being the very first company to let you make phone calls over the internet with voice over IP. And when I started, we had 20 people and we had $230,000 of revenue. And we literally IPO'd after Netscape, which was absolutely insane in early 1996.
What was the name of the company?
The company was called Vocal Tech, and it was an Israeli-based company with amazing technology. And we were, we were catching lightning in the bottle by the ability to make these phone calls over the internet for the first time. I mean, people today take for granted everything's free over IP, but at that time, it was like the equivalent of $10 a minute to make a call. So I like to say that a small group of us, took long distance from incredibly expensive to free. Then my wife's from California, and she's like, "Hey, we should move to California." But I recruited by this other startup in the DC area, and I said, "Hey, we'll do it for a year or two. It's going to fail." 9 years later, we're going public, and we got 2 kids in a house. And she's like, "Dude, what happened to the California plan?" So then we moved to California, to Silicon Valley, and we started the world's first cloud video conferencing service. So what I like to say is we had the right idea. We were 3 years before Zoom, so we were a little early. We had a nice exit. And then my wife and I love traveling. So what we did is we got rid of our house and cars and pulled our kids out of school. They were 10 and 13 at the time. And we backpacked around the world with a bag a little bit bigger than the carry-on for a whole year to 25 countries. When I got back, my wife said, "Hey, would you mind not doing another startup for a while?" So I went to a company that we all know called Logitech, mice, keyboards, webcams, etc. They had a small group that did enterprise video conferencing. And I was able to take that from small scale and build it organically to over $1 billion in revenue per year. So by the time I left Logitech, I was running a $2 billion a year enterprise hardware and software business. And I ended up meeting the investor for this company. And I said, "What do you do?" He goes, "I do solar." "Tell me more about solar." He goes, "Perovskites." "What's a perovskite?" And the short version of that story is I met the founders. They were brilliant. They were right in my backyard. And it really was an opportunity for me to go full circle from doing what I started at solar and then getting back into it. And, I would say trying to help solve climate change.
Well, congratulations on what sounds like just tremendous professional success. High five and personal. I've got a couple questions I'd love to ask you about going around the world, but I think I need to start. So credit to you. But who's the MBA program? Who set you up?
Small program in New Haven at Yale. So
Okay, well, shout out to Yale and their MBA program because we got at least one grad who's knocked it out of the park. Um, whether it's Focal Tech, the cloud web service, or Logitech, key lessons learned along the way.
there's so many lessons. So after we did the third startup, I was talking to my wife about mistakes that I had made. And I said, I could write a whole book of all the mistakes I've made. And I think that's one thing when you do a startup, you just make tons of mistakes. Hopefully you learn from them and get better, and then you proceed to make some new ones. I'd say one of the big learnings is that a lot of being successful in business is about working with human beings, and that technology changes a lot, but human nature does not change. So, for example, there's almost always a group of people that want to be early adopters, middle adopters, kind of like crossing the chasm, late adopters. And part of being successful in new technology is finding your tribe and not selling to the wrong people. And also just understanding how human beings work and how they make decisions, that some people are risk averse, some people are risk seeking, and just finding that balance is really helpful. And that's also where you have opportunities in startups where even though a group of people could have some great idea, they might not do it because they're scared or they're fat and happy because they're doing really well. And that provides your opportunity to kind of come in. I find that constantly repeats itself over and over again. I mean, it's one lesson. I'm sure I could think of many others. We talked through them.
Um, so yeah, I think you framed it really well. I've made similar observations. And in fact, I had a call this morning with the team where we were talking about, why don't investors pull the trigger? And I've seen it play out on a whole host of different levels over the years. But there's a tendency in the absence of perfect information where you hesitate. And if you understand that that's taking place, then you can either act on it if you find yourself in that position, or just recognize that there could be an opportunity there. Because even if it's blatant, people aren't going to go after it. So really well said. Um, Backpacking around the world. Oh my gosh. I gotta imagine a lot of people are listening to this thing. I want to do something like that. What was the experience like?
So we basically started with a one-way trip from the East Coast to Bangkok. I didn't even have a hotel booked when we arrived. I'm booking it on my phone. Almost all the trip we did, I describe it like a jazz concert. We had an outline of what we wanted to do, but no plans in advance. So we basically wanted to follow the summer. Started in Southeast Asia for the first 4 or 5 months. We took a diversion to Nepal because my wife said, let's go to Nepal. And then we climbed to Everest Base Camp
Wow.
with the kids, which was amazing. Then after 5 months of developing countries, my youngest son was like, he's just had it. So we went to Australia, New Zealand for the summer, Africa, Middle East, Europe, and usually when I tell people, they go, "What was the best part about taking the year off?" And I go, I think the best part was really 24/7 being with my family, like getting to know them better, because you really get to know people a lot better when you're with them all the time than
Sure.
go to school or work. And they go, what was the worst thing about it? Being together with my family 24/7, getting to know them better. Like it definitely was a mix. I think after a year we were ready to go back, but it was certainly an adventure. And I think, for speaking for my kids, um, we didn't really homeschool them that much. We just did the things that they needed to do continuity and like math or language. But I think they learned a lot about the world and how to be independent. And if one of them said, "Hey, I'm hungry," and we're in the middle of Nepal, I'd say, "Here are some rupees. Go figure it out." And they did. And I think that was one of the big lessons I gave to them. They're very confident and mature about. They know they'll always figure things out, and I think that's a great lesson that you don't learn that in school.
Um, you know, I think it's great feedback. Thank you so much. Because I have to imagine there's at least one listener who's contemplating doing something similar. And, especially if you have kids, obviously you care about them, their well-being, their growth, and, getting that perspective is amazing. We could probably also devote an entire podcast to all the cultures you were exposed to, but I got to ask, any one in particular that kind of jumped out at you and really left an impression?
I love the Buddhist culture of Nepal.
Hmm.
I just loved hiking in the mountains, just being in the middle of nowhere, and just they're very poor, but they're very happy, even having nothing. I think that's a lesson for all of us. I think one other lesson I have for me, we talk about the personal side, the professional side is, what do you do, especially as a man, when your identity is largely tied up to your what you do as a professional. And I took a year and a half off. I did some advising work, but for the most part, I stopped working. And what was interesting is, I really wanted to focus on I'm going to be a better dad and a better spouse. And what I found is, actually, that can be a lot harder to really master that than being at work. That was number one. Number two is my kids, when they would introduce me when we're traveling, like, here's my dad, Scott. He's unemployed and homeless. It's technically true. They have a little gleam in their eye from saying that. But then also, I think just the idea of sabbatical. So taking 18 months for me, I think was a great experience. Not retirement, but it's taking a pause. And then by that time, I was ready to dive into something new. I think that's the way I would approach my career. Like, what's interesting now is many of my peers, maybe yours too, now they're all retiring, and I think, why would I do that? I have all these skills and interests and things. I don't want to just play pickleball all day long. But I like the idea of sometimes taking a sabbatical and taking time off and then diving back into something else. So that completely changed the way I think about working and identity.
Well, I'll call out two things. I really appreciate your comment about, what I heard is being an unsung hero. I have an opinion that, case in point, a parent who's going to stay home with the kids is critical to a functioning society. And we should give them a tremendous amount of acknowledgement and respect, because you don't get accolades from your peers or your community. But I mean, where would we be if someone wasn't, if someone who wasn't taking time to teach their kids? So, you know, I think that's great, that you did that. I am also curious, one of the experiences that I have is I find, going nonstop, that I kind of get to this point where I can describe it. My head is full, and I have these moments where I'm like, babe, when I say to my wife, we got to go camping, because I need an evening where I can just kind of sit by the fire and allow everything to organize itself.
Yeah.
Did you find that leading up to this time off that's what the doctor ordered?
Well, three startups in a row with, I mean, basically no time off. And people say, how much time did you take off between startups? I go, well, I left on a Friday, took a Saturday off, and then I started on a Sunday. So that was because usually the startup just needs you. You can't take that break. So I literally did 20 years straight. And that was exhausting, especially the last one. When we sold the company that we founded, we literally could not make payroll when we got the money in the wire for, so that was incredibly stressful.
Hmm.
I needed a break from that. Um, but I would also say, I think part of what was interesting is, you talk about the unsung heroes. I think a lot of times at work, it's very easy to get the adulation from your colleagues. Your family doesn't give you all that. They're like, you're cut down to size. You're not the CEO. You're just dad, the one that they could rib the hell out of. And it forces you just
I'm not
to, you're not the only one. So I think it forces you to have a little bit more humility about, all right, I'm going to be better in this area. And I'm not getting the automatic adulation. Like, how do I do it? For me, it was, really focusing on building a different skill set that I had, quite honestly, had not really, not that I wasn't around as a dad or a parent, but it wasn't my main focus. My main focus was being the breadwinner and running
Sure.
my career. So it was humbling for me at times to realize, hey, I'm not as good at that as I am with these other things. Maybe I should work on that and get better.
I generally appreciate you sharing. I think it's great for other people to hear that because I'm sure they feel the same way. Um, Tandem. So if we come back, how far off until production?
Yeah, so this is a really exciting time for us. So we've raised that $50 million. We're in the middle of building our new factory that we're going to move into in the near future. And the plan is that we have prototypes by the end of the year, and then we start selling in the first half of 26. So I'd say it's ambitious, but doable. If we can do that, and really we're trying to solve two problems. One is build a product at full size and scale, which is largely an engineering exercise, not a science one anymore, and then line up customers. And the customers have basically said, if you can build this panel and it's built in the US 30% better, like we're in, we'll buy as much as you got. So if we do that, then I think we'll have unlimited demand as far as the eye can see. So this is really a critical period. Exciting, a little terrifying, but this is why I do these things. It's like it just gets your energy flowing. Like you don't feel like in my last jobs. I think people say, "Why did you leave?" And I go, "It's not that I didn't like them. I just was a little comfortable."
Mhm.
And I think being comfortable is great. It can also be a curse for you, and that it prevents you from doing something, learning something new, or taking a risk. And one of the things I've done is I've tried to look back on my career and say, all right, if I'm 6 years ahead, 10 years ahead, and I'm looking backward and I'm really comfortable and I just put more money in my bank account, which is not bad. Would you be happy with that? And I think usually the answer is no. Whereas I think if you said, I just want to stay one more year and make more money, God, that's just so easy. It's intoxicating, right? But if you look back from a little bit farther in the future, I found that gives you the perspective of, do I want to make a change? And the answer is, usually I get to a point after about 7 years plus or minus, like, yeah, I
Mhm.
really want to, I want to take a risk, and it can be harder and less comfortable. But then once you do it, it's kind of like jumping into a cold pool. You don't want to do it, and then you get in, you're like, that was fun.
I think that's I've had a similar experience, and so I think your assessment is spot on because the irony, the way I like to talk about it is that if you're terrified, it's kind of like a marker. It tells you're on the right road because you're operating without complete information, and that's where the opportunity is. Obviously, it's not a foregone conclusion, but at least you have a sense that you may be on the right track.
But I will be the first person to admit it's not for everyone. Like there's nothing wrong with being comfortable and happy and
Sure.
well off, like and safe. Like that's good for the majority of people. I'm just not wired that way, and I bet a lot of the entrepreneurs listening are like nodding, going, "Yeah, this there's something wrong with me that makes me want to keep doing that too."
Well, I think you nailed it earlier is that there's consistency over the generations with human personalities. And there's a reason why you have risk takers and people who seek comfort. It probably, if we unpacked it, one virtuous circle that makes life self-fulfilling. I'm curious, where's the factory getting built?
We haven't announced yet, but it's going to be in California. And
And
the reason why, which is kind of counterintuitive, California is expensive, obviously. Our team is here. The founder is kind of derived out of Stanford University. So there's a lot of smart talent here. And what we want to do is we want to take the R&D team and the manufacturing team, put them all in one location. What I found in my experience is that you can really underestimate the challenges of having two teams in different places with different culture and not being in the same area. Like I love video conferencing. I think it's amazing, but there's something about everyone being together, solving a hard problem when speed and innovation is important. So we're going to put everyone together, and we're going to optimize for speed and quality over cost. Although, you could fool yourself, I would say, hey, you're going to go somewhere cheaper, and then it takes you 6 to 12 months more. You've just blown more money. So I expect this will be better and cheaper. And then we'll probably, our next scale up, gigafactory somewhere probably will not be in California, but this one will.
I think that's great insight. I mean, talent is key. And I totally agree. I mean, I'm sure we can name some states where it is less expensive, but it's
I
inconsequential.
bet you can name 49 of them.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious because I have to imagine other people are wondering as well. I mean, hopefully the state gets some credit for giving you incentives to erecting the factory in the state?
I wish that were true. I'd say California is it's one of the examples of being too well off. There's such an embarrassment of riches from software and AI. I don't think they really feel the need to compete on manufacturing. But I want to be here because of the talent and the weather, obviously. And but it is a world-class talented group, and people want to live here. But no, I would say California. I would, if anybody's listening from the state of California, there's a reason why California is ranked 50th in the U.S. for being business friendly. I think I'd like to see us at least in the 30s. Like we can do better.
Interesting. You mentioned about co-locating the teams, and I like to dovetail it against something I've heard Elon say about reducing middle management, having VPs walking the production line. Um, does that dovetail with your philosophy on how you're approaching building? If
It
not,
does. Yeah, I mean, I just recently completed his Walter Isaacson biography, which I think is was amazing. I think there are a lot of lessons there. Whatever you say about Elon, he's a brilliant innovator. I think he's thought a lot about manufacturing and how do you get innovative teams to work better. And that is one of the core principles is you eliminate middle management. You have, I call them having player coaches. I think most smart people don't need to be managed, but they need to be steered and inspired. And then I think there's the idea of if you want to innovate on something, there's just something magical about having everyone together with proximity where you don't need to schedule a meeting for innovation. You're just there and it happens organically. So I believe in my experience pretty strongly. I think we all know that there's, as an example, I talked to someone the other day. They were trying to achieve something with a team. They were having all these video calls and then they just got together and hang out over dinner and they solved the problem over dinner. Why? I like to say that video is actually the misnomer is people go, I want to meet you face to face. Literally what we're doing, Kristian, is face to face. But there's something different when you're together, the serendipity of meeting that you let the conversation wander organically. You don't have if you're doing a defined thing like a podcast or something, video is amazing. If you want to have innovation happen organically where people just talk to each other, it's not as good. And
yep.
I'm not sure it ever will be.
Well, it's interesting. We've had a guest on who co-founded Noro, where it's full length video conferencing, and one of their theses is that body language is a core component of communication, and we lose that because you're only seeing a portion of me. But to your point, yes, I mean there's organic conversations that take place on the side when you're not talking about what's on the agenda.
I think it's body language, but it's also duration of meetings. So I'll give you an example. I had this head of sales who was at Logitech, and during the pandemic, he drove 6 hours to interview a candidate in a bar. And I'm like, what the hell, man? I mean, it's the pandemic, you're driving, just do the interview to me. He goes, no, he goes, because what happens is for the first hour, everybody's got their game face on.
Hmm.
And then you're in the bar. And he goes, after time, people start to relax and they kind of show who they really are. And he's like, to me, that's the most important part of the interview is once people start to loosen up and show who they really are and let down their guard, that's how you know good interview. Like that's incredibly insightful because usually all these meetings are half hour to an hour. Everybody can show up and act and have their game face. When you let down your guard and you're authentic, that's when really the magic happens, and that usually happens in person. We don't have 8 hour video calls. Thankfully, we don't have 8 hour video calls.
I think it's a great point. Scott, I genuinely appreciate your time. A tremendous amount of insights here. Before we wrap up, just some closing questions. If you had an opportunity, go back, have a conversation with your younger self, what would you share?
I think when I was in my 20s, I worried a lot about who I was going to be and whether I would have enough money and what I would be doing. And I think I would tell my earlier self, if you just do something with the, I think it's the Ikage, the circles of do what you love, do what you're good at, do what someone will pay you for, do what's valuable to the world. If you focus on that, not just to follow your passion, because there are a lot of broke actors who are waiting out there, um, that I wouldn't have worried about. Just trust that everything would work out. I think I was just so worried about how things would go.
Hmm.
um, I think that was probably unwarranted. I mean, now looking backward about that. And I think the other thing is, I think when you're young, you can take those risks that we talked about earlier that are harder to do when you have a family and a mortgage and other things. So I would encourage other people to say, I think Tim Ferriss had this question the best, said, what is the worst thing that could happen to you? She wrote about in the 4 Hour Work Week. That really made an impression on me. And what he said is usually is, well, you do something, you fail, you just go back to doing the thing you're doing before. It's not that big a deal. I've kind of taken that to heart, but I didn't really understand that at the time.
Um, I, I I think your assessment's spot on.
I would add one more thing. Being older now, when you're younger, you care intensely about what other people think about you. You change a lot of behavior so that. As you get older, I think one of the things I've realized is that you just don't give a shit anymore. Like you to the extent that not that you want to behave terribly, but you just have a confidence in who you are that is not as influenced by the people around you, and it's like a superpower. It's like you're just going to do the right thing where it works. Whereas in your 20s, I think sometimes you can be influenced in a bad way, because you care deeply about what people think about you, and a lot of what they think about you is just it's bullshit. It will drive you in the wrong direction. I wish I would have known that earlier in my career. I would have not worried so much about what other people thought about me in that way.
agree with that assessment as well. And for better or for worse, I think it takes time and experience in order to get to that point.
Yeah.
And realize,
Or wisdom from people like us, hopefully sharing some of the mistakes we made earlier on. I wish I had people tell me some of these things. I just didn't.
well, on that note, that's a great segue into my last question. That is, would you like to give a shout out to any mentor or anyone in your career who's had a real impression on you over the years?
Uh, well, I mean, I give a couple of them. One of them, there's a guy named Bracken Darrell, who's the CEO of Logitech, and so I basically funny short story is that I could not get an interview for this job for the GM at Logitech, even though I'd been a CEO and had all these multiple exits. They would not interview me because I'd never worked for a big company. They were screening me out. I finally went around everyone to Bracken, and to his credit, it was like a Saturday and a holiday, and he said, "Meet me at 7 a.m. on a Sunday." And then when I met with him, he's like, "Why wouldn't I hire you?" I'm like, "I've never worked at a big company. I don't know if I'll be successful." And he goes, "I like that." So I think, the people like Bracken in your career that give you a chance when other people conventionally will screen you out. And I think there are just some. I'd like to give a shout out to the guy who accepted me into Yale, where I was probably one of the least qualified people. But I think he liked my essay and he liked me and he saw something in me that I maybe didn't see in myself, and he gave me a chance. So, I mean, I think there are a bunch of people in my life who gave me a chance when maybe on paper I didn't deserve it, and then I was able to prove it. So, I'm
Awesome.
really grateful to them.
Well,
And of
shout out.
course, my wife, 27 years married, putting up with me all these years, probably the most.
Well, shout out to Bracken, Yale admissions, and the misses. That's awesome. Scott, again, I really appreciate your time. If there are any members of our audience who would like to get a hold of you, how can they find you?
Scott at tandempv.com or find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And again, for our audience, Scott Wharton, CEO of Tandem PV. Scott, thank you, and really appreciate your time. This was an awesome podcast.
Thanks for the conversation, Kristian. Lots of fun.
Excellent. Again, I'm your host, Kristian Marquez, founder, CEO of Finstrat Management. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Innovators and Investors Podcast. Take care. Kristian Marquez here. Thank you so much for listening to the Innovators and Investors Podcast. If you're a successful founder or an investor who would like to be on the podcast, please visit podcast.finstratmgmt.com. If you know someone that would be a great guest, please tag them on social media to let them know about the show and include the hashtag Innovators and Investors. I'd love to see your posts and suggestions. We're regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you catch each new episode, please subscribe to the Innovators and Investors Podcast. And your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show, and it means a lot to me and my team. If you'd like to know more, go to our website, finstratmgmt.com, or follow us on LinkedIn or on X. Our handle is @finstratmgmt. This is Kristian Marquez. Thank you for listening. Until next time.